All right, everybody. My name is Dave Elden. I'm from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I am the man behind Judging for the Win and the Judge channel. If you see me and Dalton every other Thursday on there. And today we're going to be talking about an exciting topic here. This is a real treat for all of you. Judging store-level events. And who here has judged a store-level event before? Raise your hand. Oh, unbelievable. Everybody. It's a very popular thing. And so this is exactly why we're talking about this today, because this is the most common thing anybody is going to be doing, right? Everybody does this. Everybody judges a store level. Not all judges work competitive level events, but everybody is going to at some point in their career be working at an event at a store. So this is why it's important to talk about this stuff. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking about the duties that you have as a judge and how those duties kind of scale up as the size of events scales up. And what sorts of challenges you have at events of one type versus events of a different type, and how we can adapt the strategies that we use to take advantage of those things as the event size goes up. So let's step one. What is the judge supposed to be doing? This is what we're going to be talking about in the context of 3 different size events today. And so what is it? Go ahead.
Be awesome.
Okay, being awesome. Let's try and get more specific than that. Any specific ideas for what judges should be doing when they're at an event? Yes.
Answering rules.
Okay, answer rules calls. That's towards the bottom, so we're not going to click just yet. But yes, that is one. Any other things that we're supposed to be doing?
You're like a quality representative of the game.
Think like more basic, lowest level possible. What physical actions am I doing at an event? Dalton.
Running work.
Okay, running were maybe. Hopefully not. Hopefully not. We're running were. What else we got in the back?
Just being accessible.
Being accessible. Okay.
Becoming a neutral party between two conflicting.
Yeah, being the person who decides who's right in cases where both people think that they're right. Yeah.
Strong customer service.
Okay, customer service.
I was just going to say answering questions.
Okay, answering calls.
Making sure your play area is adequate to the amount of players you have and that it's staying clean.
Okay, that's more of a TO responsibility, I think, for the being adequate. Keeping it clean, that's more of a player responsibility, but we all know how that turns out in a lot of cases here.
What's clean?
Making sure everyone knows sort of what's going on, so if a judge announcement needs to be made, making sure that people know like how many rounds the tournament's going to be, and like putting up like table numbers so they know where to sit, and if that's something your store.
Disseminating information about the event.
Excellent. Sort of like understanding your store and understanding what that store needs you to do as far as that.
So I distilled all of this down into a few specific tasks that we're going to be focusing on today. And one of them is pairings. You're in charge of making sure the players know who they're supposed to be playing against. So that is the first thing that we want to think about is what should I be doing in order to communicate to however many players it is, who they're supposed to be playing against in each round, and how are the players going to be able to find that person. So that's one. Collecting results is the next. We want to make sure that the players, after they finish their match, their results get entered into the computer so we can start the next round as soon as possible. And also delivering rulings. A lot of the customer service and floor coverage types of things that we talked about, I'm going to lump in under this category of giving rulings and making sure the players know what's going on in the game if there's ever any doubt about that. So some stuff that's going to be outside of the scope of this presentation is going to be deck checks. At store level events, there is not usually going to be any deck checks. Certainly that's going to be true at regular rel. Obviously at a store level competitive rel event, that's not going to be true anymore, but we're going to consider deck checks to be outside the scope of what we're talking about today. Also, we're going to say scorekeeping. We'll be assuming that that's going to be taken care of by another person. Again, not always going to be the case, but at the same time, we're going to be looking at how these tasks scale up, and scorekeeping doesn't really scale very well. It pretty much is going to be the same in every event that you're going to be working at, and so as a result, it's not really interesting to look at scorekeeping under this kind of a lens. So at that, the first type of event that we're going to be thinking about is an 8-player draft, okay? So when you whose stores, whose LGSs run 8-player drafts from time to time. Extremely popular event. Everybody who's a judge should probably have an understanding of how to make an 8-player draft happen and what is supposed to be going on. So the first thing here is the seedings and the pairings. So the first thing we're going to look at, and it's super easy. If you look in the MTR, there's a thing that shows you how to do it, or you can pull these slides up if you
The first
don't
thing
know.
you have people to show up to your store to draft.
Well, I mean, like that's the store owner's responsibility. We're assuming that they did that job for us. So if we have the players sitting around like 1 through 8 around the table like this, then that means that the bracket is going to look like this. So this seedings equals this pairings, and that is all you have to be able to do. You have to make sure the people sitting in those spots play against those opponents when the time comes. So how do your stores handle that responsibility? How do stores know or tell people this is who you're playing in these rounds?
Well, usually we don't have a circular table. We have a table like these.
I mean,
so
it's a schematic diagram.
Yeah, but I was like, usually what I would do is stand at the front of the table, and just be like, okay, this is seat 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now that we know what the numbers are, seat 1 is this person, seat 2 is this person, and so on, and then they go to the seats.
All right, solid. That's pretty standard, I think, for most stores and most ways that I've seen it done. Sometimes if you're doing like a really nice, professional event, they'll have like a thing that runs on top of Word that basically like says the players' names in a table diagram, and that's nice because you can just show it to all the players and be like, okay, here's where I'm sitting on this table, and it works out for you. But usually you're probably just gonna have to read them out. How do you decide where your pairings are, or how do you show the players or tell the players how to get to their opponents?
I tell them, look, count 4 people away from you. That is your opponent. So in this case, if you're looking at a square, it'll be outside corners and inside little X, big X, little X.
Some places just print out the like this person facing this person face this person, and then just print it out and post it like there's your pairings.
All right.
Yeah, if it's a GP side event like on demands, I'll just have at the table, big X, little X, you understand what that is, or explain it if they don't, and then have them come for their second round of pairings in the storekeeping. If it's at a local store event, I'll usually not even bother, and I'll just print slips.
All right. So that's pretty representative. So an 8-player event, there's a lot of variation in how this stuff happens, and that's because like with a low enough number of players, you can basically do it however you feel is appropriate, and it's going to work out no matter what. So 4 pairings. If you're running the event single limb, you can basically just give the players the bracket and have them fill it in. It's pretty simple. You know what the bracket is. You know the entire bracket at the time that you seat the players because it's deterministic. There's no like random elements in it, so you can just give them the bracket and have them fill it in. If you're running it as a Swiss event, of course, you're going to need to pair them every round, so they're going to have to talk to the scorekeeper or have that information communicated somehow. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, I mean, like it's not a real critical thing as long as you guys have a system that works and a system that all your local players understand. It's a good system. Okay, so the next thing, since we talked about the pairings and the seedings, the other thing we were going to talk about is coverage. So let's be real, this is the smallest event that you can have. A single judge should be able to handle multiple pods of 8-player drafts without any real issues as far as running into a problem of not being available for someone for customer service or for a judge call. So that's good. Any questions that we have so far about a smaller event? Yes.
I'll say it's something with like double face cards or some other special announcement. Saying it like, or a special one where like there's no lands in the pack, so it's a chaos draft with some lands in some packs. Explaining, like doing a quick announcement at the beginning of the draft, explaining how we're going to handle that particular thing. Like, okay, everyone keep their land in their pack, or don't take it out this time. We're going to draft it. Or, okay, so at the beginning of the draft, at the beginning of each pack, show your double face cards, announce them. So things like that for the specialty sets that those are relevant announcements for. Some people might not know, or some stores might do it differently. So explaining how your store would like that handled might be a helpful little announcement before they start doing their first pack.
All right, good. Any other advice that you'd like to give for an 8-player draft? All right, beautiful, beautiful. So the next type of event that we're going to talk about is an 8 to 24 player constructed event. Now, has anybody here ever judged in a store an 8 to 24 player constructed event? And again, the answer is of course everybody has. Pretty much, if your store runs F&Ms and you've ever run like a standard or a modern F&M, that's pretty much that's probably the event category that we're talking about. So. Okay, it's the most common event type, and also, game days were a thing back when this presentation was originally put together. But I guess we can pretend that says whatever the new name for game
Store
days
championships.
is. Yeah, store championships. There we go. So, okay, what are we going to do in order to make sure that people know who they're playing against in every round? We can't use the same thing that we talked about earlier because it's not going to work anymore. We can't just give the complete bracket to everybody because every round is going to be run as a Swiss, so we don't know who you're playing against in round 2, even if we know who you played in round 1 and whether you won or lost. So you're going to have to figure out some way to every round to tell the players who they're playing against. And so what would that be? What does your store do? You in the blue sweatshirt, I don't think we've heard from you yet.
Our store usually just prints out pairings and posts them somewhere.
Okay, so printing out the pairings and posting them somewhere. Yeah, you probably the most common way to handle that, I think. Any alternative suggestions?
At a store like Pastimes, they have our tools and they have it so you can scroll pairings onto the TV monitors.
Yeah, so if your store has a TV like this one, there's a plugin you can get for Words called R Tools. If you Google it, you can find it pretty easily. And that lets you scroll the pairings on the TV so that you don't have to print them out and post them somewhere. It's pretty slick. It can help if your store has a lot of players such that it would be inconvenient to have all of them crowding around one or even a couple of pairing paper postings. Any other thoughts on this topic here? Yes.
Or just yell out the pairings.
Yeah, if you have a small enough store, that's the third option that you can have. So for a small event, you can just print out the slips, but printing an actual pairing sheet is recommended. This is something that I sometimes see at some stores. They just print out the slips and they give them to the players, and then the players have to find their person whose name is also on the slip. Again, that will work pretty well for a smaller event, but not for if the number goes up. So if you have a TV, you've got the R tools, and that's pretty standard for that task for that type of event. So for the results, there's a couple of different ways that you can handle it. Probably the most common way that everybody does it is you print by cutting machine, and then you cut the result slips, and then you hand them out to all the players, right? So show of hands, whose store runs it that way? Actually, not as many as I was expecting. So about half of you. Someone who didn't raise your hand, what does your store do instead to collect the results?
Hey Jerry, I won 2-1.
Oh man.
Yeah, that's our store too.
Boy. Okay, so that is an answer, but as an engineer, I feel like that answer is a little dissatisfying to me because I'm lazy.
Alright,
I do
We got there in 3.
I want other people to do as much of the work as possible, so I don't have to do as much of that work. So
when they're not regulars and they say I won.
Oh yeah.
Okay, who are you? What's your name?
You see that all the time at GPs too. Like, the players will report their results for the draft and be like, "Oh, Judge, I won." I'm like, "Okay, so you called me Judge, which means that you don't know my name." So
You're probably wearing a name tag.
Yeah. I'm wearing a name tag. Where's yours, buddy? Okay, so that's pretty simple. One of those situations is going to be the case, but the easiest way is to print the result slips and have the players come to the front with the result slip to report. One of the things that some of the stores do, instead of passing the result slip out and filling them in at the table, is we will have all the result slips up at the front, and you have to write down up at the front what your results were. And that I think strikes a nice balance at a smaller event because you don't have to do work passing result slips out to people if you can tell everyone come up to the front and then fill out the slip up at the front. So I kind of like that idea. Anything else before we move on to coverage at an 8 to 24 player constructed tournament? Okay, so for coverage, it's kind of a little different. One judge is probably sufficient for an event that's this size, unless something super crazy is going on. In most cases, the judge can even probably play in the event and excuse him or herself from the match anytime there's a judge call. It will probably take a couple minutes.
I do that all the
So
time.
when I'm playing, I generally am not also judging because the place that I play at has lots and lots of judges, which means that I'm not generally needed. But occasionally there will be some kind of a really challenging call, or someone will need a second opinion on something, and they'll have to ask me. But yeah, it's very simple to play Magic and judge at the same time, as long as it isn't like a super like. I don't know, if everybody's really trying to call a judge on everybody like as many times as they can per round, that's maybe that's not going to be sustainable. But in a normal store situation, yeah, you can play and judge at the same time for an 8 to 24 player event, no problem. So okay, now we're going to be talking about the big boy. Yes.
What? So this doesn't really happen with me, but it definitely has before, and I can definitely see it in a lot of other cases. If you are the judge and there's no one else who is at what used to be called rules advisor level, but like no one very competent with rulings, what would you recommend if you're playing in an event and your opponent needs help?
Okay, so that's a very valid question. If you're playing in an event and a call comes up in your own match, there's a couple of things. Ordinarily, since it's a store level event, the prizes aren't going to be super high, so a lot of the time it'll be okay to just say, yeah, this is what it is, you can trust me. If you don't feel comfortable with that, if it's like a more contentious call, the best course of action I think would be to get the store owner involved. And the store owner is probably going to be at least moderately familiar with Magic. If they aren't, then there are some resources that are available to getting judge help in real time. Our region, for example, has a Slack channel that you can type in questions to. So you can type your question into the Slack channel and someone will get back to you very quickly. So those are the resources that I recommend if you didn't feel comfortable giving the answer to the question yourself and saying, yeah, this is how it works, trust me.
One of the things is sometimes I get like my opponent asks for judge, and I don't feel when I'm in the match with the guy or the person I'm facing, I don't make that call. I usually, because that's why I've been helping him get his judgeship and getting my TO up to date with some of the rules. Whenever there's a big rule change, I let him know. Everything along those lines.
So let me ask you a question though. Training someone else and bringing them in is obviously a great long-term solution. What happens though if for example, you bring someone else in and they say the wrong answer? What would you say?
I would be like, hold off 1 second. Let me go look this up real quick.
Yeah. So
then I just show him the ruling, and I show my opponent the ruling, and then I get the TO involved to help interject what's going on.
yeah, so it's a great long-term solution. Occasionally you'll run into some short-term kind of hiccups of that type, where it's going to be important to make sure that the right answer gets brought out in a way that's both instructive for the person you're mentoring and also doesn't affect the result of the game that you're playing.
That's why I made it my own thing. I don't judge my own match.
So yeah, any other questions? We have one more.
Say that if I currently work as a store employee, so I'm not able to play in the ones that I'm judging, so it's not really relevant. But in past things, like I would probably do something like if they're like, okay, I don't think that's how this works, but you're a judge, but I look it up on my phone and be like, okay, so this is the rule. So it's not like me making the ruling. I would show them like either look up the card and look at the ruling on the card or something like that. So it's like, or show them the part of the comp rules or something that is showing what the rule is. So it's not just me saying it. If there's no other judge available or someone, like sometimes the TO is just not confident on rules, that's why they hire the judge.
Yeah. So that makes a really good point here.
Or if it's a hidden information thing where they're like, look, I have a judge question, but I can't ask you because the whole point is I don't want you to know what's in my hand. Then I'd probably even go to like another player that I know is experienced in the next match and be like, can you just look at his hand and like
Tell 'em
see
what
if
the
you know
answer is.
see if you know the answer.
Yeah.
Like someone that I
We have
generally
a couple
would
of those
feel.
too.
Yeah.
Because
That's
it
fair
wouldn't
enough.
be fair for me to look at his hand to see information that he specifically doesn't want me to see.
Yeah, of course. So this is another good point that Smith brought up here, is that if you're really experienced in the rules, a lot of the time you should be able to point to like certain resources that prove you're right. Some judges can even go in the CR and look at like specific rules for
Like
specific
FAQ
cases.
for the set.
So that's another really good thing that you can think about. Any other things before we move on to the biggest event?
There is one other way you could do it. Say, for example, my assistant isn't at the event, or the TO technically is not at the event. There is a like Slack channel, and I try not to use this, but it is an option to use. Judge chat.
Yeah. So there is other real time options. If you don't have Slack in your region, there's an IRC channel that you can join. You should be able to find the link for that on Judge Apps. That's another good option. So moving on to the next, and this is the final type of event that we're going to talk about, 24 to 60 player pre-release. Now this is an important one because this is usually, for most stores, the pre-releases is the biggest event you guys. Would that be fair to say for your store here? Yeah. So anyone here who works at a store, would you agree with that? The pre-release is the biggest time when you have the most Magic players playing at the same time
Not
in
gonna
your
say the
store.
PPTQs, but yeah.
Yeah. So that this is important. It's the largest store level event for most locations, and that has a couple of important consequences. One of them is that there's lots of new players at pre-releases also, which means that high attendance plus lots of new players equals lots of chances for something to go wrong. Okay, so that's obviously something that you want to be paying attention to and something you want to keep an eye out for. With that in mind, how do you do pairings at the biggest event that your store is going to run? We talked earlier about doing a couple of different options. You can scroll them on the screen with our tools. You can print out the pairings and post them in a couple of places. Anything else besides that? Yes, Dalton.
So two things I would say would be to try to put pairings in multiple places.
Okay.
If you have 50 people in your store and maybe your store is not that big, it could be really hard to get all 60 people in one corner of the room to look at their pairings.
Yeah, that is exactly right. And for an event this size, you don't want to get lazy. You print out the paper pairings or you display them on the monitor. Calling them out, calling a rule isn't going to be a good solution. Printing out the result slips and giving them to players and having them find their opponents isn't a good solution. You want table numbers and players going to those tables being communicated via a mass communication level event, which would either be scrolling them on a TV, preferably multiple TVs, or having them posted in multiple locations.
And the second one was table numbers.
Yeah, table numbers is an absolute must once you get past a certain number of players, because there's no chance that everybody is going to know everybody else, and it's going to be very difficult for someone to find a specific someone else if all they know is their name. So that's good. Multiple locations are recommended to prevent bottlenecks. That's something we talked about before. Now for the results, again, this is going to be another thing. We're not going to get lazy here. We're going to cut out the slips and we're going to hand them to the players, because all the other stuff that we had talked about earlier as a way to get the results in from players, that's an okay idea if your event isn't too big, but once you get past a certain size, the only real way to do it efficiently is to do it like this. And in fact, even once you get up to 2,500 player GPs, this is how they do it. So this solution scales extremely well with the number of players, and this is what you want to be doing if your event is more than a certain number. Now, one thing that's going to happen is that if you are in a pre-release, sometimes you'll encounter people who've only ever played kitchen table Magic before. And at a time like that, you might run into a situation where someone who's in that category doesn't know what a result slip is or doesn't know what it's for. So you might have to make an announcement at the beginning of the day that explains, yeah, when you're finished with your match, you fill out your results slip like this and make sure both people sign it and then take it up to the front of the stage. But otherwise, it should be pretty simple. It's one of those things where someone can look at it and understand what they're supposed to do. And that's a really great system. When you have a logistical system that people can look at and understand how it works without you explaining it to them, that's like the holy grail. And result slips have that property for a lot of people. So the other one is going to be coverage. We're going to be talking about coverage. Now, who here judges a pre-release event at your store? Okay, how many judges do they generally have at a pre-release event for your store?
Just me.
So the answer tends to be one really experienced judge or two, not as experienced but still competent judges. So 30 players is generally what like the common knowledge or the conventional wisdom would say is approximately that's about the point where you stop being able to effectively service that many people as just one person. So if you're expecting a higher event attendance than this, it might be a good idea to consider adding another judge, or at the very minimum, using some of those strategies that we had talked about earlier to make sure that if there is a spot where more than one match needs people to do an adjudication for rules, that there is a something that they can turn to so they aren't waiting for an indefinite amount of time for the one judge to be finished with his first call before you can move on to your second or maybe even third. So that's the advice that I would have as far as coverage. Now there are a couple of special considerations that are important to take into account here for a 24 plus player event, especially including a pre-release, which is a pre-release is a limited format event. Okay, now if you're going to a GP and you're going to do a sealed event, you'd have pool registration, and then after that you'd have deck list registration. And who does deck lists at their pre-release or pool registration?
We
have done.
No, nobody, unbelievable. It's not recommended because it adds a bunch of time and it's not fun. And on top of that, people screw it up all the time. So you're really not getting a lot of benefit out of making people register their pools. Now, at GPs, when the stakes are way higher and the number of players is way greater and the chances of someone being an unsavory character might be a little higher too, that's where it makes sense. But at a store level event, it doesn't make sense because it's not fun, and that's what the pre-releases are for. Now,
It's also a learning
Well, this
experience.
is a PPP.
well, that's not a pre-release.
No, but you said at a store level event.
Yeah.
And that is a store level event.
It's
that
also a
would be
learning
required.
event.
It is a learning event. Now, if players are concerned about cheaters, which is definitely a thing, like very many stores have had concerns, or not just concerns, but actual cases where it's known to have happened, where a player will be like, hey, we'll play in the midnight pre-release, and wow, what's like the Black Dragon that's like unbeatable in the last set. Yeah, you get a Tetsuma. Maybe it'd be pretty sweet if I got to play another event where I had access to that kind of a magic card. So they kind of import some more. So if that's a concern for your location, if that's something that people have been accused of, or if people have been caught doing, what you can do is you can have the players open all their booster packs and lay all the cards out in front of them, and then someone from the store, either a judge or a store employee, use their phone to take a picture of the pool. And then if there's a question about it, we know what the pool was, and we got a picture of the pool taken before there was a chance for someone to slip an extra card in. Because everyone's going to be sitting together, there's going to be an announcement said that no bags or other stuff on the table besides your pools. And so this is something you can do that kind of strikes a nice balance between how much of a pain in the butt it is to do versus how much benefit you get from taking that extra step. So that's a good thing that you can take into account if you want to have more faith in the integrity of the event. Any questions either on this most recent thing that we were talking about, or in any best practices for doing a judge at a store level event? Oh, usually I have a please be gentle on there, but I guess maybe not today. So yeah.
So you don't have to be gentle.
No.
Go straight to that
harsh
DQ.
Questions all in, everyone. All right. Well, thanks for coming out here. It's been a great time presenting to everybody. Thanks.